What if I told you that the Israel you see on today's map, the modern nation making headlines every week, may not be the Israel the Bible was talking about? What if everything you thought you knew about God's chosen nation was only part of the story? A story that, until now, has been missing some of its most critical and most shocking chapters. Most people, including millions of American Christians, believe that the modern state of Israel, born in 1948, is the direct continuation of the biblical Israel we read about in Scripture. They see its rebirth as the exact fulfillment of God's ancient promises to Abraham and his descendants. And because of that, many believe they must support this modern nation unconditionally. But what if I told you the Israel on today's map might not be the same Israel God spoke of in the Bible? Here's a fact most people never hear in church. The modern state of Israel is largely secular, driven by political forces, by nationalistic ambitions, and many of its leaders have no interest in following the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as their forefathers once did. Yet Christians across the globe rally around it with a kind of blind allegiance, convinced that standing with the modern state of Israel is the same as standing with God's eternal plan. This isn't just a question of geography. This is about spiritual identity. And the differences between the Israel of the Bible and the Israel of our headlines are far deeper than most people realize. You see, God's promise to Abraham was never just about a physical piece of land. It was about a covenant, a sacred, binding relationship. And while many living in Israel today claim the inheritance of Abraham, the real question is, are they living in alignment with the covenant God established? Stay with me until the end of this series, because we're going to dig into questions that could completely overturn the way you've understood Israel your entire life. Who are the Zionists, and how did they shape the modern state of Israel? What does the Bible actually say about the land promised to Abraham? And here's the question that might shock you most. Is it right for Christians to support everything modern Israel does, no matter what? The answers may be uncomfortable, but they're necessary. Because what you're about to hear will give you a biblical perspective on modern Israel, its spiritual reality, and how all of this ties into end-time prophecy. To understand the present, we have to go back to the beginning. The story of a man named Abraham in the book of Genesis. In Genesis chapter 15, verses 18 through 21, God makes a promise, a specific land for Abraham's descendants. This land, called Canaan, included what is now modern-day Israel, but it also stretched into parts of Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and even Egypt. It was a far greater territory than the borders you see on Israel's map today. But here's the key. This land was not just a real estate deal. It was a land tied to a covenant. God's people were to live there in obedience to him. The land was meant to be a reflection of God's relationship with his people, a visible sign of a spiritual reality. Fast forward thousands of years to 1948. The modern state of Israel is established after World War II, the Holocaust, and years of political maneuvering, especially through the efforts of the Zionist movement. Jews from around the world return to the land, some believing they are fulfilling prophecy. But many Bible scholars and historians argue the modern state of Israel is not the theocratic nation God described in the Old Testament. It is a secular state shaped by politics, nationalism, and military power. Yes, the geography overlaps with ancient Israel, but the spiritual reality? That's a very different story. Another critical moment in Scripture comes with Abraham's grandson, Jacob. In Genesis chapter 32, verse 28, after wrestling all night with an angel, Jacob is given a new name, Israel, meaning he who struggles with God. From him came the 12 tribes of Israel. But stop and think. When God gave Jacob this name, was he defining a piece of territory? Or was he creating a people, a chosen people, bound to him in covenant relationship? The Bible makes it clear. Israel is not just a political state. Israel is a people, chosen by God to walk in obedience to him. The land was a gift, yes, But the name Israel was never about borders alone. It was about a living covenant between Creator and creation. So, when we look at modern Israel today, we have to ask, are they truly living as the covenant people of God? Because that is what defined biblical Israel, and it's the standard by which we must compare the ancient nation to today's state. And to really understand the Israel we see in the news, we need to understand Zionism, the movement that made modern Israel possible. Zionism began in the late 19th century as a political movement calling for the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. It gained strength because of centuries of anti-Semitism in Europe culminating in the Holocaust. But here's something rarely discussed. Many early Zionists were secular Jews. Their goal was not to restore a nation under God's law, but to create a safe homeland where Jews could live free from persecution. Theodor Herzl, known as the father of modern Zionism, envisioned a secular state, not a biblical theocracy. And in many ways, his vision is exactly what Israel became. Today, the nation is governed largely by secular political leaders. Yes, there are deeply religious communities in Israel, but the government's driving forces are national security, political influence, and maintaining sovereignty in a volatile region. Torah-based law does not govern the land. And this brings us to a hard question for Christians in America and around the world. When we say we stand with Israel, are we standing with a biblical Israel or a political Israel? Because if we confuse the two, we risk supporting something God never intended. This confusion gets even deeper when we think about the people who controlled Israel during the time of Jesus and the people who lead it today. Some ask, are they the same? Historically, Jesus lived under the shadow of the Roman Empire. His crucifixion was the result of a partnership between the Jewish religious authorities of that day, primarily the Pharisees and Sadducees, and the political power of Rome. Yes, many of those religious leaders rejected Jesus. But it's critical to remember, not all Jews rejected him. His earliest disciples, including Peter, John, and Paul, were all Jewish. The people living in modern Israel today are descendants of the ancient Israelites, but many are secular, and their devotion to God's covenant is far from what it was in the days of the prophets. The Roman Empire is long gone. The exact individuals who condemned Jesus no longer exist. So no, the people who orchestrated the crucifixion are not the same as the secular Israelis leading the modern state today. But the spiritual divide remains. To this day, many Jewish people do not accept Jesus as the Messiah, and that fact still shapes the relationship between Judaism and Christianity. For many Christians, one verse has been the cornerstone of their unwavering support for modern Israel. Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. This has often been interpreted to mean, if I bless Israel in any form, political, military, financial, God will bless me in return. But here's the sobering question. Should Christians support every single action of the modern Israeli government, no matter what? The reality is modern Israel, like any nation, makes decisions that do not always reflect God's righteousness. The government has been involved in military operations, political conflicts, and policies that raise serious ethical and moral questions, especially concerning human rights, justice, and peace. Take the ongoing Palestinian conflict. This isn't just a political chess game, it's a humanitarian crisis. Land disputes, military occupation, and blockades have led to deep suffering on both sides. While it's important to pray for Israel and recognize its role in biblical prophecy, we cannot confuse political nationalism with God's covenant relationship. Jesus himself, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Supporting Israel should never mean turning a blind eye to injustice. If we follow Jesus, our loyalty is not to any political state. It's to his kingdom, his truth, and his justice. This brings us to another hard question. Is Israel always the victim, or can it also be the aggressor? Since its creation in 1948, Israel has been in multiple wars against Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt. It has faced real threats from nations like Iran, whose leaders have openly called for Israel's destruction. Israel's survival has required strength and military readiness. But strength cuts both ways. Israel's military actions, like the occupation of the West Bank or the blockade of Gaza, have drawn accusations that it destabilizes the region and worsens the suffering of Palestinian civilians. The truth? Israel is both under threat and a regional power. The conflict is deeply complex, and no headline or political slogan can capture the full picture. As Christians, we are called to look beyond propaganda and see the situation through the lens of God's wisdom, praying for peace and justice for all people in the region. And then there's the topic that makes many uneasy: the influence of Zionism in Western politics, media, and culture. You've probably heard public figures, from political commentators to celebrities like Kanye West, claim that Zionists control world narratives. While it's true that Israel maintains extremely close ties with the United States, and that Jewish individuals hold significant influence in media, entertainment, and finance, we must tread carefully. The danger is falling into anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Zionism is real, but it is primarily a political movement, not a secret spiritual cabal pulling invisible strings. Many Jews in America and Europe are deeply connected to Israel culturally, but they are not part of some monolithic plot. We cannot afford to let political biases twist into prejudice. As followers of Christ, our mission is to stand for truth, and that means rejecting lies, even if they sound edgy or hidden. The real question isn't who secretly runs the world. It's how can we be peacemakers in a world where politics and faith so often collide? Because at the end of the day, whether it's Zionists, politicians, or religious leaders, every human agenda will fail if it is not aligned with the will of God. And that is exactly where biblical prophecy enters the conversation, which leads to the next critical question. Could the wars we see today in Israel, Gaza, and the surrounding nations be setting the stage for the end times? Some theologians believe so. They point to passages like Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 and the book of Revelation, describing a massive invasion of Israel by a coalition of nations. Many interpret these prophecies as referring to a future war involving powers like Russia and Iran, the infamous war of Gog and Magog. If they're right, what's happening now could be more than just another chapter in Middle Eastern politics. It could be part of the final chapters of history itself. But Jesus gave us a warning in Matthew chapter 24, verse 6. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Prophecy reminds us to stay watchful, but Jesus reminds us not to live in fear. God's plan will unfold in His timing. Our job is to remain faithful, prayerful, and active in spreading the gospel until the very end. So, where does all this leave us? The modern state of Israel is a complex blend of history, politics, and spiritual significance. Yes, it occupies much of the land promised to Abraham, but it is not the same Israel we read about in the Old Testament. That Israel was defined not just by borders, but by covenant obedience to God. Today's Israel is largely secular, shaped by political agendas, military necessity, and the Zionist movement. Its government is not led by prophets or judges anointed by God, but by politicians and parties, some religious, many not. As Christians, we face a sobering challenge. How do we honor the biblical importance of Israel while refusing to give blind, unconditional support to any nation acting outside of God's will? Our allegiance is to Christ first, to his kingdom, his justice, and his truth. That means we cannot confuse political loyalty with spiritual faithfulness. Israel's place in prophecy is important, but it does not exempt it from accountability to God's standards of righteousness. And let's be clear, the prophetic significance of Israel today is undeniable. The Bible tells us Jerusalem will be at the center of world attention in the last days. We're seeing that right now. Headlines about Israel dominate global news. Tensions in the Middle East ripple across the world, and nations are choosing sides. But prophecy is not an excuse for passivity. It is a call to readiness. It is a reminder that God's story is moving toward its climax, and that we, as his people, are called to be faithful witnesses in these critical times. That means praying for Israel and for its neighbors, seeking justice and peace for all people in the region, refusing to be manipulated by political spin or media bias, staying grounded in Scripture, not in speculation. We must also guard our hearts against two dangerous extremes. First, the extreme of unconditional political support, as if defending every decision made by the Israeli government is the same as defending God's will. Second, the extreme of anti-Israel hostility, as if opposing Israel's politics means rejecting God's covenant promises. Both extremes miss the heart of God. His plan for Israel has always been about relationship, about a people walking in obedience to him. And his plan for the church has always been about being a light to the nations, including Israel. Now, what about the wars we see today? Could they really be part of the countdown to the end times? We cannot know the exact day or hour, but Jesus told us to watch for the signs. And right now, those signs are multiplying. Rising hostility toward Israel, growing alliances between nations that openly threaten its existence, the centrality of Jerusalem in world politics. Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 describe a future war where a coalition of nations invades Israel, only to be supernaturally defeated by God. The book of Revelation speaks of global conflict, spiritual deception, and a final showdown between the kingdoms of this world and the kingdom of Christ. Are we living in those days? Maybe. The events unfolding now may be the prelude to those prophecies, or they may simply be reminders that the stage can be set very quickly when God decides the time has come. But here's what we do know. God's promises will not fail. His covenant with Abraham is still alive. His plan for Israel and for the nations will come to pass exactly as he has spoken. And in the end, Jesus will return, not as the suffering servant, but as the conquering king, to establish his reign from Jerusalem. That's why our response right now matters. We are not called to sit on the sidelines, arguing over political talking points. We are called to be intercessors praying without ceasing, ambassadors representing Christ's kingdom above all, messengers proclaiming the gospel with urgency. And that urgency is real, because every war, every headline, every shaking in the nations is a reminder. Time is running short. So here's my challenge to you. Don't just watch history unfold. Be part of God's plan in it. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Speak the truth in love. Stand for justice. And most of all, keep your eyes fixed on the one who is coming soon. Because at the end of the day, no political leader, no army, no nation will write the final chapter of Israel's story. That chapter belongs to the Lord Almighty. And when it's written, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. If this message has opened your eyes, I want to hear from you. Tell me your thoughts in the comments and share this video so more people can hear the truth. that the mainstream media will never tell them. And don't stop here. We have more to uncover, more biblical mysteries and prophetic insights that will deepen your understanding of the times we're living in. Click over to the next video in this series, and let's keep this journey going. Because the story of Israel isn't over, it's just getting started.